Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1892, and the crisp, thin air of the Colorado Rockies, sharp with the scent of pine and raw earth, echoed with the intoxicating, almost feverish promise of gold. High in the remote, rugged peaks near what would later become the desolate, wind-swept ghost town of Animas Forks, a small, ambitious mining claim known only as the Prosperity Vein beckoned, drawing men from across the burgeoning American West. Each arrived with a singular, desperate dream to find their fortune and carve out a new life from the unforgiving, hard-scrabble land. At the helm of this precarious enterprise was Jedediah Thorne, a hardened prospector in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of weathered lines and sun-baked creases, his eyes holding the keen, almost predatory glint of a man who had spent 3 grueling decades battling the brutal elements and ruthless competition of the Western Territories. Thorne possessed an uncanny, almost mystical intuition for finding ore, a gift that had saved him from ruin more than once in the fickle, cutthroat world of prospecting. His crew consisted of 12 men, a motley group as diverse as the American landscape itself, each carrying their own hopes, their own burdens, their own desperate dreams of striking it rich. There was Patrick O'Malley, the quiet, devout Irish immigrant, his strong hands calloused from years of toil in various mines, often humming melancholic hymns as he worked, his melodic voice a stark contrast to the rough and tumble cacophony of the mine. Then came the boisterous, inseparable brothers Lars and Sven Jorgensen from the frigid fjords of Norway, their robust laughter often echoing through the otherwise silent mountain camp, their good-natured rivalry a constant source of amusement. And finally, the youngest, the eager-eyed apprentice, Billy Turner, barely 18, fresh from the farmlands of Kansas, his youth still clinging to him like morning dew, his dreams untarnished by the harsh realities he would soon face. Each man carried a story, a family back home, or a desperate hope he believed the mountain would finally grant him. The Prosperity Mine itself was a sprawling, man-made labyrinth of hand-dug tunnels descending hundreds of feet into the earth's dark, suffocating embrace, a testament to sheer human grit and the insatiable thirst for wealth. Here, deep beneath the surface, the only constant light came from the flickering smoky flames of kerosene lanterns, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the miners' efforts, and the only sounds were the rhythmic clang of pickaxes against stubborn rock, the grinding rumble of ore carts on their tracks, and the incessant, maddening drip of groundwater. No one, not even the sagacious and experienced Jedediah Thorne, could have predicted that this relentless pursuit of subterranean wealth would lead them not to glittering gold, but to a chilling, sentient discovery, an ancient malevolence that would systematically claim their sanity, strip them of their very identities, and ultimately consume their lives, leaving behind only the echoing whispers of what they found, forever entombed in the mountain's heart. A secret that demanded silence. Jedediah Thorne, a man forged in the fires of the frontier, had indeed lived a life of relentless struggle and hard-won victories. Originally from a modest background in Virginia, he had migrated westward in his youth, driven by an insatiable wanderlust and the siren song of opportunity. He had seen countless boomtowns rise and fall in the blink of an eye, witnessed untold acts of desperation, raw greed, and profound human courage, and survived encounters with both the untamed wilderness and the brutal realities of human nature at their most extreme. He often relied on his sharp instincts, his unwavering resilience, and an almost preternatural ability to read the subtle signs of the land, gifts that had repeatedly pulled him back from the brink of ruin. By 1892, he had chosen to plant his flag in the Animas Forks area, his belief hardening into an obsession that the prosperity vein held far more than just trace amounts of gold. He felt deep in his bones that it contained a motherlode, a strike that would secure his legacy. His crew, as previously mentioned, was a poignant cross-section of frontier society, each man a microcosm of the hopes and desperation of the era. Patrick O'Malley, with his quiet, unwavering Catholic faith, often hummed ancient hymns as he worked, his melodic voice a stark, almost ethereal contrast to the rough-and-tumble cacophony of the mine. Lars and Sven Jorgensen, with their formidable, Viking-like builds, were prodigious and tireless workers, their good-natured rivalry and boisterous banter a welcome source of amusement in the grim daily grind. Young Billy Turner, full of youthful idealism and starry-eyed ambition, often talked of sending large sums of money back to his struggling family in Kansas, dreaming of a life beyond the dust, darkness, and suffocating confines of the mine. Each, man's unique humanity, their individual hopes, their secret fears, and their very souls, would soon be tested against an inhuman, unfathomable force that lurked just beneath the surface of their perceived reality. The first few months of mining were remarkably fruitful, exceeding even Thorne's most optimistic projections, albeit relentlessly arduous. Gold dust and small, glittering nuggets steadily accumulated in their sluice boxes and ore sacks, enough to keep spirits high, the men motivated, and the intoxicating dream of untold riches very much alive. Thorne, meticulous to a fault, faithfully kept a detailed journal, his precise handwriting chronicling daily yields, recording the precise measurements of new tunnel extensions, and even noting the occasional minor dispute or moment of camaraderie that punctuated their harsh existence. His entries were initially filled with an infectious optimism, interspersed with keen geological observations and confident predictions of an even richer, more massive strike just beyond the next steam of rock. The mining camp itself, a cluster of rough-hewn cabins clinging precariously to the rugged mountainside, high above the timberline, was a surprisingly lively place after sundown. The weary miners would gather, seeking fleeting solace and temporary escape from their punishing labor in boisterous card games, shared bottles of harsh, burning whiskey, and the familiar, often melancholic refrains of old folk songs and sea shanties that filled the cold, thin mountain air, temporarily warding off the creeping loneliness. The first anomaly, a subtle, almost imperceptible discordant note in the otherwise monotonous rhythm of mining life, appeared in Thorne's journal entry for August 17, 1892. It was a brief, almost dismissive note, tucked away among columns of figures and geological observations, almost an afterthought. O'Malley reports odd acoustics in new shaft, claims to hear voices in the rock, likely exhaustion or the mountain playing tricks, advised him to rest. Thorne, a man of empirical observation and deeply rooted skepticism, initially dismissed it as the product of the mind's claustrophobic echoes, the constant, maddening drip of subterranean water, or simply the fatigued and overworked imagination of a man toiling in perpetual darkness. But his dismissiveness, born of a lifetime of rational thought, would soon be profoundly challenged. 2 days later, a visibly shaken O'Malley reiterated his claims, his voice trembling uncontrollably as he described faint, indistinct whispers emanating directly from the very rock walls of the deepest shaft, indistinct yet terrifyingly clear in their insidious purpose. They were calling his name, whispering his identity. Thorne, concerned now not by a supernatural event, but by O'Malley's escalating agitation and the potential corrosive impact on the fragile morale of his crew, ordered him to stay above ground for a few days, hoping the crisp, fresh mountain air and respite from the mine's darkness would clear his head. But the voices, it seemed, were not to be so easily contained. They were not confined to O'Malley's individual mind, but were a pervasive, growing presence. On August 25th, Lars Jorgensen, a man renowned throughout the camp for his rock-solid, unflappable composure, his immense physical strength, and a skepticism as deep and unyielding as the mine itself, stumbled out of the deepest workings, his usually ruddy, jovial face ashen and slick with cold sweat, his eyes wide with a profound primal fear Thorne had never seen in him. He reported hearing a kind of singing, not human, from the walls of the deeper tunnels, like the rock itself was humming a tune of sorrow, a dirge for the living. Thorne's journal entry for that day reflected his growing, undeniable unease, a cold dread seeping into his own pragmatic worldview. Jorgensen agitated. Reports of singing rock sent him back down with Sven, ordered them to focus on the gold, ignore any trick of the air. The unspoken implication was clear. Fear was a far more insidious and dangerous contagion than any mine gas, and he needed to maintain order, or his entire operation, and possibly their lives, would unravel. The next few days saw a disturbing proliferation of reports from nearly every shift. More miners described a pervasive, disorienting sensation underground, a chilling feeling of being watched by unseen, malevolent eyes, and the growing oppressive presence of faint, almost subliminal sounds, a collective murmur, a horrifying chorus of indistinct whispers that seemed to permeate the very stone of the mountain, seeping not just into their ears, but into their very souls, twisting their thoughts. The true horrifying turning point, a descent into the absolute abyss, came in early September. Young Billy Turner, the apprentice, full of youthful vigor and a nascent, naive sense of invincibility, eagerly entered a newly exposed vein that Thorne's keen eye had discovered, a narrow, glistening fissure known tantalizingly as Vein 7, which promised an unimaginably rich strike of pure gold. Hours later, he emerged from the mine, not with the usual dust and sweat of honest labor, but in a state of profound catatonic shock. He sat by the flickering campfire, staring blankly into the hypnotic flames, his lips moving silently, almost imperceptibly, as if engaged in a desperate one-sided conversation with an invisible, silent entity only he could perceive. When Thorne, his heart pounding with a nameless growing dread, finally managed to coax him into speaking, Billy whispered, his voice a raw, broken rasp, barely audible above the crackle of the fire, "They're waiting. They speak through the gold, and they showed me what's coming." He would say no more, receding into a deep, unresponsive state, his eyes empty windows to an unspeakable, mind-shattering horror, forever lost to the world. Thorne's journal entry for September 4, 1892, reflected not just concern, but genuine, profound existential fear. Young Turner is broken. He saw something in Vein 7, spoke of waiting voices. The men are uneasy. Some speak of leaving. I feel it myself now, a coldness that isn't from the rock, a silence that hums, a silence that screams inside my head. The mountain, it seemed, was beginning to talk back, and its conversation was terrifying. Thorne, despite his rapidly growing, paralyzing fear and the gnawing dread that had taken root in his stomach, was fundamentally a man of logic, determination, and a pragmatic sense of responsibility for his crew. He felt he had no choice but to confront whatever had so profoundly shattered young Billy. He decided with a grim resolve to investigate Vein 7 himself, bringing with him Patrick O'Malley, whose earlier disturbing experiences with the voices made him seem, paradoxically, oddly attuned and perhaps even immune to the initial shock of the increasingly sinister phenomenon. As they descended deeper into the newly exposed fissure, the air grew heavy, almost viscous, pressing down on them, and the whispers intensified, growing stronger, clearer, no longer just indistinct murmurs, but individual sounds, almost forming words. Thorne initially tried desperately to rationalize them, dismissing them as mere echoes, the auditory tricks of the mind's unique geology or the hallucinatory effects of stale air. But then, O'Malley gasped, his face draining of all color, pointing a trembling ink-stained finger at the glistening walls. There, within the metallic sheen of the ore, faint, intricate geometric patterns began to shimmer, shift, and coalesce before their disbelieving eyes. They were not carvings, not superficial marks etched by ancient hands. They were intrinsic to the very rock itself, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence that seemed to emanate from within the stone. "It's a language," O'Malley whispered, his voice thin with a mixture of terror and awe, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "The mountain speaks." Thorne, a practical man who had always trusted what he could see, touch, and measure, tried desperately, frantically, to rationalize the impossible, to force it back into the confines of scientific understanding. "Refractions of light," he told himself, his mind racing. "Natural mineral formations, a trick of the mind." But then an experience shattered his last vestiges of reason, ripping the veil from his eyes. A voice, clear as crystal, resonated directly into his mind. It was not an audible sound, not a vibration in the air. It was a pure, resonant thought, a question that resonated in the deepest, most primal chambers of his consciousness, echoing in his very bones. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Thorne stumbled back, his lantern clattering against the rock, its light dancing erratically, mirroring the chaos in his soul. O'Malley, meanwhile, seemed utterly entranced, almost captivated, his hand reaching out, almost reverently, to touch the shimmering vein, his eyes distant and unfocused, as if seeing visions only he could comprehend. "They know us," he murmured, his voice hollow and far away. "They remember. They were here first." A cold dread, colder and more profound than any mountain ice, gripped Thorne's heart, a terror that went beyond the physical. He seized O'Malley, dragging him violently away from the pulsing, luminous vein, a primal, overwhelming urge to escape the unimaginable, overwhelming all other thoughts. His journal entry that night, scribbled with a shaking hand, was terse, stark, and devoid of his usual precise detail, betraying the sheer mind-numbing terror he felt. "Vein 7 is not gold. It is something else, something that sees, something that speaks without a tongue, something ancient and hungry. We seal it tomorrow. All work ceased. May God forgive us, for we have disturbed a sleep that should never have been broken." But the mountain had revealed its true, horrifying nature. True to his word, Thorne ordered Vein 7 sealed immediately and irrevocably, using heavy timbers and tons of rock, a desperate, almost superstitious act of appeasement against an unseen force. But the act of sealing it, of attempting to contain the horror, seemed only to anger whatever malevolence lay beneath. The whispers, far from being contained or silenced, intensified dramatically and spread throughout the entire mine, no longer confined to the deepest, most remote shafts. Miners reported hearing their own names called from empty, shadowed tunnels, the familiar, beloved voices of distant family members, of wives and children, or of friends long departed or far away, beckoning them deeper into the earth's suffocating embrace, promising untold riches or cruel comforts. The men grew increasingly agitated, succumbing to a creeping, insidious paranoia that frayed their nerves and shattered their sleep. Arguments erupted in the dimly lit tunnels, fueled by fear and sleep deprivation, only to be followed by periods of unsettling, collective silence, where every man listened intently to the rock, terrified of what it might say next, of whose name it might whisper. The first definitive disappearance, a chilling harbinger of the horror to come, came on September 18th. Sven Jorgensen, ever the practical, boisterous, and deeply skeptical one, scoffed at the whispers and the growing, palpable fear, insisting on working a remote, isolated tunnel alone, claiming with a forced bravado that he heard good gold singing there, a tantalizing melody of fortune. He never returned from his shift. A frantic search party, their lanterns swinging wildly in the oppressive darkness, found his pickaxe lying discarded, its head still embedded in a rock face, but absolutely no sign of Sven, not even a struggle. His brother Lars, grief-stricken and now utterly terrified, claimed he heard Sven's voice calling from the direction of the sealed Vein 7, begging for help, his voice laced with an unimaginable torment that chilled Lars to his very bones. Thorne, clinging to the last vestiges of reason, dismissed it as madness, the product of grief and pervasive fear. But a gaping, irreparable crack had formed in the crew's already fragile resolve, a tear in the fabric of their sanity. Over the next 2 horrifying weeks, the mine systematically claimed 5 more men. Each time they vanished without a struggle, without a scream, without leaving the slightest trace, often when momentarily separated from their companions in the winding, treacherous tunnels swallowed by the mountain's silent maw. The remaining miners, their numbers dwindling with terrifying rapidity, huddled together in desperate, silent solidarity, refusing to work alone, their flickering lanterns clutched tightly in trembling hands, their eyes wide with perpetual fear. Thorne's journal entries became a frantic, almost illegible record of diminishing numbers and mounting, unbearable terror. His precise hand, once so steady, was now a trembling scrawl. "The mountain is hungry," he wrote on October 1st, his hand shaking so violently the ink smeared. "It calls to them, whispers their deepest desires, and they answer, drawn like moths to a deadly flame. May God help us all, for we are trapped within its belly." The psychological toll on the remaining men was immense, driving them inexorably to the very brink of sanity and beyond. Miners reported seeing fleeting indistinct shadows dancing in the periphery of their vision, hearing laughter that was not quite human, chillingly alien and discordant, and feeling cold, unseen breaths on their necks in the stale, warm, oppressive air of the mine's depths. One miner, Thomas Flynn, a burly man known for his strength, was found rocking back and forth in a fetal position in a dark corner, mumbling incoherently about faces in the rock looking out, waiting for their turn. He disappeared hours later, his lamp left flickering mournfully. The camp, once a vibrant hub of activity and boisterous hope, became a desolate place of hushed whispers, constant, nervous glances, and pervasive, paralyzing fear. Jedediah Thorne, a man whose entire life had been meticulously built on logic, empirical experience, and the tangible realities of the frontier, now found himself utterly overwhelmed, confronting the utterly inexplicable, a horror that defied every rational explanation. He spent his sleepless nights poring over his journal, its pages filled with his own descent into terror, desperately searching for a pattern, a rational explanation, a single shred of scientific understanding that could make sense of the unfolding horror. But there was none. The mine was alive, he finally terrifyingly concluded, or something profoundly sentient, malevolent, and ancient lay dormant within it, now awakened. Something that communicated, that lured, that consumed not just bodies, but the very essence of human identity and soul. He began to suspect with a creeping, nauseating certainty that the gold itself was merely a cruel, glittering lure, a seductive distraction, meticulously designed to bring men deeper and deeper into its insidious, hungry grasp, fattening them for a purpose unknown and terrifying, a purpose that whispered of a sacrifice. On October 15th, a desperate, haggard Thorne gathered the remaining 4 men, their faces gaunt, haunted, and etched with profound fear. Lars Jorgensen, 2 younger miners named Frank Davies and Caleb Stone, and the still catatonic Billy Turner, whose inert presence was a chilling, living reminder of what awaited them all. "We leave," Thorne declared, his voice a raw, hoarse whisper, utterly devoid of its usual authority, his eyes wide with a desperate resolve. "We leave everything. This mountain is cursed, and it wants us all. We must escape its maw. They began the arduous, terrifying climb out of the mine, abandoning their tools, their accumulated gold, and all their ill-fated hopes for fortune. But the mountain, it seemed, was not yet finished with them. It did not let them go easily. As they ascended the main shaft, the whispers, which had once been faint, turned into a deafening cacophony of agonizing voices, a horrifying chorus that assaulted their minds from every direction. Their lost companions, their distant families, even the voices of their own forgotten pasts, echoed with malevolent clarity from the dark, cavernous recesses of the tunnels, twisting their sanity into fragments. "Jedediah, why did you leave us?" A voice that sounded exactly like Sven's called out, filled with a spectral torment. "Father, it's cold down here," a child's voice pleaded from the darkness below. "Thorne, the gold. There's more," a seductive, insidious whisper promised from the rock walls. A final tempting lie. The psychological attack was relentless, suffocating, tearing at the very fabric of their minds. Frank Davies, his mind finally snapping under. The unbearable weight of despair and terror, suddenly dropped his lamp, plunging a section of the tunnel into deeper, absolute gloom, and lunged wildly into a dark side tunnel, screaming his wife's name in a final futile act of desperation. They heard his fading, agonizing cries, then an abrupt, chilling silence that seemed to swallow all sound. Caleb Stone, his eyes wide with unadulterated primal terror, tried to bolt, scrambling frantically back down the shaft into the abyss, but Lars Jorgensen, surprisingly strong despite his own profound fear, held him back with an iron grip, refusing to let another man be lost. They finally emerged from the suffocating, haunted mine shafts into the blessed, if cold and harsh, mountain air on October 16th, battered, broken, and forever scarred beyond repair. Only 3 men remained from the original 12, Jedediah Thorne, Lars Jorgensen, and Caleb Stone. Young Billy Turner's body was found slumped at the mine entrance, his youthful face contorted in an expression of unimaginable, extreme terror, his eyes staring blankly into the dark, hungry mouth of the shaft, a silent, macabre sentinel. He had died of what appeared to be heart failure, his young heart simply giving out under the sheer unbearable weight of what he had witnessed in the depths. The 3 survivors staggered back to Animus Forks, their stories incoherent, fragmented by profound trauma and the relentless psychological assault they had endured. They spoke frantically of singing rock, voices in the walls, and the mountain's hunger, their words a jumble of terror and disbelief. The townspeople, while initially sympathetic to their plight, largely dismissed their terrifying tales as mine madness, a common, albeit tragic, affliction among those who spent too long in the deep, dark, claustrophobic confines of the earth. However, the sheer number of missing men, 10 in total, and the survivors' undeniable, profound psychological distress, a palpable aura of terror that clung to them, prompted a reluctant official inquiry. Sheriff Ben Carter, a pragmatic and level-headed man who believed only in what he could see, touch, and logically explain, led a small expedition back to the Prosperity Mine. He found the camp utterly deserted, tools scattered haphazardly as if abandoned in a sudden flight, and the mine entrance, still gaping, a silent, ominous maw swallowing the mountain light. They ventured cautiously into the main shaft, their own lanterns casting anemic, dancing light into the oppressive gloom. The deeper they went, the colder and quieter it became, a silence far more profound and unsettling than any mere absence of sound. Carter later reported a strange, heavy silence that pressed in on them, a palpable void unlike anything he had experienced in other mines, a silence that seemed to listen. They found Vein 7, still sealed with the crude timbers Thorne had used, but the whispers had ceased. They heard nothing but the drip of water. Seeing no physical evidence of foul play, a cave-in, or any other tangible, rational explanation for the men's disappearance, Carter reluctantly concluded that the miners had likely succumbed to exposure or a hidden, undiscovered collapse deep within the mountain, and their bodies were simply lost forever to the mountain's depths. The Prosperity Mine was officially closed in November 1892, deemed too dangerous, and, ironically, now unprofitable. The mountain had won, but the survivors, despite their physical escape, were never truly the same. Jedediah Thorne became a reclusive hermit, his mind irrevocably shattered, haunted by the ceaseless echoing voices that still tormented his every waking and sleeping moment. He spent his remaining years sketching the intricate geometric patterns he had glimpsed in Vein 7, muttering incoherently about the mountain's language and its insatiable hunger. He died in 1898, his journal found beside him, its final, trembling pages filled with desperate, fragmented warnings. It is not contained. It remembers, and it calls. It wants more. Its hunger grows with each soul it claims. Lars Jorgensen, unable to endure the haunting memories and the terrifying whispers, left Animas Forks constantly looking over his shoulder, convinced that the singing rock would one day find him, its malevolent melody twisting his sanity to its breaking point. He died mysteriously in a logging accident a few years later, his body found with an expression of profound terror, his eyes wide and vacant. Caleb Stone, the youngest survivor, eventually sought refuge in California, desperate to escape the mountain's shadow, but reportedly suffered from severe, debilitating night terrors, screaming about faces in the rock and hungry voices that never left him, a mental prison of sound. The once thriving town of Animas Forks itself slowly, irrevocably, faded into obscurity. By the early 1900s, the ephemeral gold rush had long since dwindled, and the remote, harsh location became a desolate ghost town, its vacant buildings slowly reclaimed by the relentless elements, their empty windows staring out like sightless, vacant eyes mirroring the lost souls of the miners. But the chilling legends of the whispering mines persisted, passed down in hushed, fearful tones by the few remaining locals and grizzled prospectors who dared to venture near. Occasional unsettling reports emerged from the region, near the old Prosperity claim, disorienting echoes that seemed to follow, sudden, inexplicable temperature drops that defied logic, and the persistent, unsettling, almost irresistible feeling of being drawn deeper into the abandoned tunnels by an unseen malevolent force. The mountain, it seemed, was still calling. In 1978, a team of amateur spelunkers, thrill-seekers, and geology enthusiasts exploring the rugged Animas Forks area stumbled upon a previously unmapped shaft, a hidden maw leading deep into the mountain's secret dark heart. They found it unnervingly clean, almost sterile, as if recently cleared with no accumulated debris. At the bottom, they found a crude wooden door, long rotted and splintered, but still bearing the distinct, violent markings of Jedediah Thorne's desperate axe, a testament to his final futile act of defiance. Behind it, they discovered a hidden chamber, its walls shimmering with the same strange, metallic ore Thorne had described in Vein 7, pulsing with a faint internal luminescence that seemed to breathe. As they approached, the air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and faint whispers began to emanate from the very stone, growing steadily louder, more insistent. One of the spelunkers, a bright geology student named Sarah Jenkins, bravely recorded the sounds on her portable cassette recorder. Later analysis of the recording by linguistics experts revealed a complex array of overlapping, multi-layered voices speaking in a language that defied all known human linguistics, yet contained a disturbing, almost primal familiarity, as if it were a memory from the dawn of time. Jenkins herself reported suffering intense headaches, nosebleeds, and vivid, terrifying nightmares after the expedition, claiming to hear the voices calling her name from her own bedroom walls, beckoning. her back to the mountain's cold embrace. The team, deeply shaken and profoundly disturbed, quickly sealed the shaft, reporting their chilling findings to the local historical society, who, in turn, reluctantly contacted federal authorities, sensing something far beyond their understanding or jurisdiction. The federal response was swift, decisive, and strangely unnervingly quiet. A classified government team, vaguely identified as a geological survey and resource assessment, arrived in Animas Forks within days, swiftly and efficiently taking over the entire site. They conducted extensive soundings, detailed mapping, using advanced secret technologies, and deployed highly specialized covert equipment deep into the mountain. Within weeks, the newly discovered shaft and the entire Prosperity Mine complex were permanently sealed with tons of reinforced concrete and hardened steel, an impenetrable barrier against whatever lay within. All public and private access was denied indefinitely. The local population was fed a carefully constructed, bland narrative. It was merely a geological stabilization project to prevent dangerous collapses in an unstable area. But an internal memo from the survey team, later leaked to an independent journalist in 1995 by a disillusioned ex-agent, contained a chilling, stark observation that belied the official story. Acoustic anomalies confirmed. Pattern recognition suggests complex non-human communication, recommend long-term containment and avoidance of direct interaction. The entity appears to respond to directed thought and actively seeks new conduits. The old mine shafts were not just tunnels, they were arteries for a consciousness, a circulatory system for a malevolent, ancient intelligence. The mountain had a heartbeat, and it was not human. The Prosperity Mine, buried deep beneath impassable layers of concrete and solid rock, became another classified footnote in the vast, unexplained, and often terrifying history of the Americans' West. Its secrets were now official government secrets, locked away from public scrutiny. But the fundamental question remains, one that continues to gnaw relentlessly at the edges of reason and logic. What did Jedediah Thorne and his ill-fated miners truly discover in Vein 7? Was it merely a peculiar geological anomaly that simply preyed on their deepest fears and the psychological fragility inherent in long confinement and isolation? Or was it something far more ancient, far more sentient, a primordial consciousness, a terrestrial intelligence that had lain dormant for millennia beneath the Colorado Rockies, awakened and stirred to malevolent, hungry life by the miners' relentless greed and their unwitting intrusion into its sacred, undisturbed domain? The whispering mines continue to haunt the legends of Animas Forks, a silent, chilling warning emanating from the deep earth itself. And sometimes, on a still, windless night, when the moon casts long, distorted shadows across the desolate, snow-capped peaks, and the air crackles with an unnatural silence, you might just hear it too, a faint collective murmur emanating from the mountain's very core, a chorus of indistinct voices calling out names that have long been forgotten by the living, yet are still vividly remembered, and perhaps even possessed, by the sentient stone. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. For the continuation of such content and to support us, please subscribe.